Welcome back to the second part of your favorite Pan-African show, Bottomline Africa. Now in studio, I have Mark Bichachi, political communication consultant, as well as Javas Bigambo, as a governance expert. And I expect anytime from now, Dewa Maringa to join me all the way from South Africa. He is, of course, from the Human Rights Watch there. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to the show. And Mark, let me begin with you. And tonight on Bottomline Africa, we had too much content and we had to leave some of the stories out because of what has been happening in the last 24 hours in Africa. I mean, with the resignation of the Ethiopian Prime Minister, of course, the South African president also resigned. I mean, what is happening in Africa?
Well, this is one of the great triumphs of access to information and the development of human capital by way of increasing the general reasoning of the African continent. The time has passed where we were able to oppress our people by virtue of them not being able to access information and indeed being unable to access education. A globalized village that means that more and more people are rising up to the realization that they have rights, they have features, they have reasons for which they can live and fight for their own democratic space. And that has been shown by the protests in Ethiopia, which was impossible in the 90s. So these protests are a culmination of people who are agitating for freedom, and the winds of change, they are definitely blowing over Africa.
Javas?
Well, something is starting up across the continent. What we are witnessing, say, in Ethiopia, you realize that there is an emerging consciousness amongst the people of that nation who have been for so long subdued. And the subjugation and how they actually been stifled, their spaces of operation, their democratic space, etc., is something that could be nearing its end as the people start now expanding or pushing the brackets of the democratic space further. If Ethiopia will ultimately open up democratically, have the people speak as they wish, engage as they want, and participate in a democratic process and politics the way it is in many parts of Africa, then we will agree that Ethiopia can easily grow even in leaps and bounds economically. Because once democratic spaces expand, people and even investors are enthused by that space to even invest further, and economically we'll get to have a buoyant space for operation, for growth, etc.
Mark, let's put Ethiopia aside for now and talk about the southern African politics, including Zimbabwe and South Africa. It's, of course, we all know what happened in Zimbabwe a while back. Zimbabwe is minus Mugabe, minus Changirai now. South Africa is minus Jacob Zuma. And we've seen Mnangagwa and, of course, Ramaphosa now taking up positions. I mean, this is a totally different kind of a political landscape in the southern tip of this continent. What does this say about politics there?
Absolutely. It's a good question you ask. And I remember it was on this show, interestingly, with Javas as well, when we talked about the need for the southern tip of Africa to be set free from its freedom fighters. Because one of the things that you realized that is in common with Jacob Zuma, with Mugabe, and the rest of the South African leaders is their claim to fame and their claim to power was that they were involved in the trenches fight against apartheid. But right now you have a situation where those who had set the South Africans free were now oppressing them through authoritarian rule, and in the case of South Africa, through unfair, corrupt practices and state capture by the people such as the Guptas. What we are seeing now is the people rising up and realizing that they need to set free themselves from the history of the nation. Just because someone fought for something does not mean they can lead you into that thing. And that's becoming a reality across Africa. You can look at many of the despots that are left across the continent. They fought for independence. They spoke a good game. But when it came to the implementation, they were driven into corruption. So what we need to see right now across Africa is people feeling that they no longer need to pay a debt to those people who set them free from the colonizers, because those who set them free seem to be colonizing them anew under corrupt practices.
And Javas, apparently the Nasibe dynasty in Togo, they're also under fire from the city citizens there. We've seen a lot of demonstrations happening there. And as far as these two leaders who have resigned in the space of 24 hours, what do you think this says about the future of Africa's politics? Because it's not common to see leaders in Africa resigning.
Well, Africa has got a very interesting way of presenting its dynamic political processes and even the growth of democracy. I do not want to be extremely hopeful and declare that the two resignations are heralding a new dawn of political consciousness across the continent, because all the countries in Africa cannot actually be moved or stirred just by those two critical resignations. Now, just across the Kenyan border in Uganda, we have a president, for example, who's lasted in power for so long, for decades, yet his conscience is not prickled at all by these kinds of happenings. You remember also the Arab Spring, when the world witnessed the Arab Spring taking place and, in fact, unraveling. It did not stir the entire Africa. Yes, it brought new interests, new imaginations of new possibilities. It made us reimagine how we can confront powers that be that maybe people do not want to have them within such positions of influence. But now looking at putting South Africa on the table, you realize that President Zuma did not want to leave his position. Actually, he was pushed out of office. But the moment the ANC's executive arm recalled him and actually persuaded him to step aside, and being a bit reluctant, knowing that the day that followed he was going to face impeachment, he tried to avoid that kind of shame, because he would not now have survived that kind of impeachment. So there is nothing really to celebrate. There is nothing really durable or honorable about Jacob Zuma's resignation. He was actually pushed out of office. Now, when you look at Ethiopia, then the dynamic is actually very different. There is
of course, Javas, before we go to Ethiopia, I'm sure you'll agree with me, the reason as to why he was pushed out of office is because of corruption allegations, poor governance. I mean, do you think a leader should be left in office, when he's facing this kind of serious allegations?
Well, it takes us back to the necessity of perpetuating the rule of law and also institutions that sustain that rule of law, constitutionalism, and national values. When you put President Zuma into perspective, you realize a couple of things. Remember the Nkandla report, and that actually is something that should have taken him down. It did not. When there was new consciousness with roads must fall, the fees must fall, even the president's conscience was not stirred up to see which direction is it that he needs to take the country. But remember that there was precedence. Jacob Zuma has fallen on his own spear. Remember that the way he ascended to office by edging out President Thabo Mbeki is actually the same fate that has befallen him. The only difference is that here, in this case of Jacob Zuma, he has been riddled, dogged by cases of corruption. In fact, his shoulders right now are very weak by all those allegations of corruption throughout his term.
We're going to talk about the EFF reaction shortly. And Mark, I saw you smiling earlier with regards to Java's point of view. What do you want to say? No,
because Javas needs to be reminded that the winds of change, they blow in a very interesting way. There's no way an entire continent can change in a day. But I can tell you for free that an entire continent can change daily. What do I mean? If you have an addiction to tobacco, you are told by the doctors you do not quit, as they call it, cold turkey. You take a small step towards change. Morgan Tsvangirai, the late, when he ascended to power as Prime Minister of Zimbabwe, it seemed like a small step in the right direction. But that small step was a butterfly wings that caused a tsunami to remove Mugabe years later. The winds of change, they blow insignificant today. But just like mounds of dust piling up day by day, soon you will have a mountain. And the reality of the matter is this, that Africa is rising. It's rising intellectually, it's rising democratically, and it's rising economically. Even speaking about the Arab Spring, it is not all bad news. Look at Tunisia, for example, a gem in the Arab world, a gem that is embracing secular society and integrating it with Islamic culture. So the reality of the matter is this, that when the winds of change blow, they may blow slow, but they blow steady, and they will deliver their promise.
Well,
Mark Bichachi, you need to realize that democracy...
Javas, as you react to that, yes. I'll give you time to react to that. We've already said that, Africa's politics, there are a lot of dynamics. But one thing that is common in all these countries in Africa is that there's a big or huge number of youth. Well, most of them, of course, are employed and they're earning for good governance. They're looking for a leader who's going to give them employment. Don't you think these are the individuals or people who are behind this kind of an uprising we're seeing in a country like Ethiopia, perhaps?
Well, the case of Ethiopia is a bit different. Actually, the Ethiopians have been sleeping through a revolution. They are actually late in the arena because most of other countries in Africa at least sprinted a little earlier into the spaces of democracy. Ethiopia has lagged behind for too long. And with the recent happenings, I want to pleasantly hope and imagine that they are not going to be cowed or actually to even step back or roll back the kind of aggression that has commenced. They need now to move with calculated speed to see to it that actually the democracy that they yearn for is that which now they get to embrace. And the leadership, in fact, the leadership of that country, through their laws, through their institutions, now need to start seeing how that space can be expanded for the benefit of the people presently and even future generations.
I think, Javas, the people who have issues with the ruling class in Ethiopia, the majority, the Oromo apparently, and you're talking about a leader who brought electric train to Ethiopia. He initiated a lot of development projects in Ethiopia. Apparently Ethiopia was even dubbed as the next China of Africa. Do you think it has issues to do with the majority being sidelined perhaps by the minority?
You see, when you look at development approach in Ethiopia, there is very limited participation of the public and the involvement. The people are not at the center stage of driving the national economic change and progress in that country. So even though that progress is there, and in fact Ethiopia has been hailed to be now possibly actually an emerging powerhouse, economic powerhouse in Africa, unless the people play a critical role in driving the economic progress of a nation forward, that progress remains only removed to the extent that it works for the elite, for the ruling class, and not for the people. Yes. Take the case, for example, of North Korea. North Korea is, you can say, arguably advanced. They even have got, nukes, etc. But the people in that country are not free. The people in that country are not at liberty. They are subdued completely. They are stifled. In fact, right now, they are ossified by the ridiculous approach of leadership and governance by their leader. The same thing now applies in Ethiopia. It is important for any leader to appreciate that to move a community forward or a society forward, you need the people to be at the center, to be the cogs in that wheel of progress.
Mark, do you agree that part of the uprisings we're seeing in Africa has mainly to do with a huge number of youth, not just youth, but unemployed youths, perhaps?
The factors of any kind of revolution and unrest in a society are always driven by two categories of people. The first category is, of course, young people who want to access opportunities and have a longer lifespan to live. If you're 20 years old and you are looking at another 50 years of an oppressive regime, you're more likely to stand up and demonstrate more than a 60-year-old who's looking at 10 more years of the same regime. At the same time, you have the middle class who, whenever they are spurred into action, these are the drivers of any economy, really. And when they get onto the streets to demonstrate, then that economy does get to a standstill, and you have to listen to them. Because let's remember that state power is not removed from the societal structures. Within the societal structures of any prime minister and indeed president are people who are in the middle class who tell him all the time that what you're doing is unfair to us. So the reality of the matter is that there is a great pressure within Africa, which has the largest young population in the world, for change. That's definitely a fact. But the second thing that we cannot forget is that material success does not equate to the freedom of the soul. If your soul is not free and you're living in a 6-star hotel room, you are still a prisoner. If I kidnapped you today and I took you to Villarosa Kempinski and paid for the 20 million room, you'd still be in prison. So it is not the opulence and the luxury of your prison that makes a prison a prison. It is actually the fact that you are unable to speak your mind, you are unable to dream, and you are unable to imagine. Muammar Gaddafi fell on this very principle. He ran a very good economy, the biggest debt-free economy in Africa. But at the end of the day, what the human soul desires more than the Samsungs and the iPhones of this world is the freedom for which all of us were born. This realization needs to hit a lot of African governments, because the time for authoritarian rule is coming to an end. They really, really do need to begin to consider the rule by soft power.
And Javas, I think there's an individual here who is in agreement with you. That is the EFF leader, Julius Malema, who says that it's a bit too early to celebrate. Well, he's saying that, you know, what they've witnessed in South Africa is not the removal of Zuma, but some sort of a swapping, you know, swapping Zuma with yet another more corrupt individual who is Ramaphosa. So do you think Ramaphosa is the right man for South Africa?
As to the rightness and the manness of Ramaphosa, it's a different debate altogether. He is a man who's grown through the ranks of ANC, and he's battle-hardened in matters of the struggle for democracy, for the liberation of the people, South Africans. Remember that even when the late Nelson Mandela had Ramaphosa in favor to succeed him, even Zuma was there, and a couple of other leaders. Now, the fact that these individuals have been in the bosom of the struggle of that country doesn't necessarily mean that they are the right people. Now, as to President Ramaphosa, he is worlds apart in terms of leadership, approach, consciousness from President Zuma. Just the same way President Zuma was worlds apart with President Thabo Mbeki, who was an intellectual, a president who fostered or worked toward African Renaissance, etc. Now, ideologically, we may say that there is some semblance, some way that you can liken aspects of President Thabo Mbeki with President Ramaphosa. But now, when you look at President Jacob Zuma, there was a bit of intellectual vacuity in him that he actually cannot even be said to be paling in comparison, because there is no comparison whatsoever. But now I think there will be a bit of enthusiasm and hope amongst some quarters that President Ramaphosa is able to take the nation a little forward than what President Zuma tried to do. You've even heard what the DA, the Democratic Alliance party leader, Musi Mumaine, congratulating President Ramaphosa upon ascension to that high office. The South Africans should not just jump onto the streets and celebrate the ascension to office by President Ramaphosa. I have heard some use derogatory language dismissing President Jacob Zuma. But I think it is too early to rush to a conclusion about how suitable, how perfect, how durable a man and a leader and a President Ramaphosa will be for South Africa.
And of course, they have the general elections in 2019. That is just next year. Mark, do you agree with the EFF leader and, of course, Javas here, that it's a bit too early for South Africans to celebrate yet?
You know, let me put it to you like this. Jacob Zuma is such a failure if you elected a Class 8 dropout, you'd probably do better. I think just in terms of language, Cyril Ramaphosa will take the South African nation better. He can count, he can say 700,000 without starting from the beginning. He can say the term beginning and not call it beninging. He can read a speech. If you looked at Jacob Zuma's exit speech, he still could not read some words. So the comparison here is really between a comatose president and a breathing one. Cyril Ramaphosa will definitely do better, it goes without saying. But also at the same time, Cyril Ramaphosa has built himself personally from apartheid to now. He's worth about $450 million US. That's definitely someone who's achieved quite a lot. I expect that he will do better than Zuma. How much better he will do is anyone's guess, but he will definitely do better than Jacob Zuma.
Finally, let's talk about Zimbabwe, and of course, that's sad news of the death of Changirai, who has been the main opposition figure there for a very, very long time. Now, Javas, what does this mean for Zimbabwe's politics? Does it mean Mnangagwa now will have some sort of a safe landing and will sell to the presidency?
Well, first,
any kind of serious competitors?
First, I mourn with the people of Zimbabwe and MDC for losing Morgan Changirai. He's a man who stood firm, stood up, and forcefully sought to expand the democratic space in that country. He stood and faced off with God-forsaken tyrant that Mugabe was, and for that reason, he will be remembered by generations to come. Now, his departure, his demise, definitely spells doom for MDC, because we haven't seen any leader in the mold of Changirai having been groomed, or even in their slates, to take over, to drive MDC further. And if we're to look at the election that is to come in a couple of months' time, MDC may want to take really much time to reorganize themselves, get an inspirational national leader who can drive that party to an election and face off with President Mnangagwa. Now, this actually is, unfortunately so, or fortunately for Mnangagwa, going to be one of those possibly easy elections for him, because he's not going to face off with with stiff challenge or a battle-hardened challenger who can take on him. And the thing is that it also demonstrates that in any mature democracy or in any country, of course, Zimbabwe is still a toddler in matters of democracy, we need to have various leaders occupying democratic spaces or leading political parties, and not only just one or two leaders, that the absence of one is now a party for the other who remains as the sole inheritor of an election.
Yes, well said, Javas. Mark?
The reality of the loss of Morgan Tsvangirai in Zimbabwe is a great loss to the Zimbabwean democratic space, and I did mourn with the people. However, the MDC died a while back. There was MDC A and B by the time they were going to the previous elections, and now there is a C. And you even had the current acting leader of the MDC calling for a coalition of opposition parties. Without a coalition of opposition parties, I can tell you for free today that Mnangagwa will win that election at 8 a.m., as we famously say in Kenya. He'll win it early in the morning. That being said, we need to understand the nature of opposition parties in the southern tip of Africa. The DA did an interesting move in choosing a black person to lead the Democratic Alliance. It's going to be interesting, again, to check and see, will the IFP rise up in the Durban areas, in the Zulu areas, in the absence of a Zulu president? And it's the same thing in Zimbabwe, that these post-independence opposition parties do not have the gravitas and the wherewithal that these entrenched ANC and ZANU-PF parties have. And it's the same thing in Tanzania as well. Chadema is a much younger party in Tanzania than CCM. So the reality about political organization and what Javas has said, that moving political parties beyond the strength strength and the character and the charisma of a person into institutional bodies that can actually pose a credible pursuit for the top officers in this country, it's going to be difficult. So what needs to happen in both of these countries is these political parties need to entrench themselves into the grassroots with a long-term goal of being able to be viable political opponents and possibilities of winning power in the future.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was Mark Bichachi, who's a political communication consultant, as well as Javas Bigambo is a governance expert. Always a pleasure to have you both on the show. Unfortunately, we couldn't link with Dewa Mainga from South Africa. He's from the Human Rights Watch. Many thanks for watching. But before we wrap up, it's Thursday. There's no way we're going to end the show without a TBT soundbite tonight. And it's from Jaramogi, the late Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. Let's listen in.
Well, let me say that I think those who think of me like that are very wrong indeed. I only laugh at them because they are short-minded and they don't know what they're doing. Why I appear to be pro-East is because the weight has been so heavily overweighted on the western side because Kenya has been under British. And the Americans' influence here is also very strong. And in order to be neutral, I might appear as if I'm pulling the weight in order to balance it towards the east. And anybody who's seeing me just I'm pulling in order to bring the balance, they tend to think that I go east. But I am, because I must pull towards east in order to bring about the balance. And immediately the balance comes, I can only be proud to tell you that I'm an African nationalist who will always tour what I feel is right for the African people in Kenya and in Africa.
Of course, that is the late Oginga Odinga there speaking, and of course it forms up our TBT soundbite tonight. And earlier we did ask you on our Twitter poll if you believe there is a wave of political change sweeping across Africa. Let me just take 2 or 3 tweets here. And at Smile, Jesse says yes, not only Africa but across the globe. And at Gabriel says, I say no with capital letters, since what is happening right now across Africa, to be precise in Zimbabwe, South Africa, already happened in my own Kenya back then in the year 2002, and it was swept away with selfishness and betrayal in 2007, so nothing new is happening now. One more tweet. At Erico, ENG says, we've been having black whites leading Africans as presidents. The power is with the people, and Africans have realized that. Hashtag, the change is inevitable. Many thanks for your feedback and many thanks for watching the program. Of course, you'll be watching Bottomline Africa right here on KTN News. Remember, this program is aired every Monday to Thursday from 10 to 11 p.m. Until next week, bye-bye and enjoy the rest of the evening.